Good morning. Welcome to the forum. This is the forum sponsored by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University. You probably have attended a few forums in your day. So again, this is a series that the Institute has put on for 25 years. This is the 25th year of this forum, and I in fact have been at every one. Every single one of them. So it's my pleasure to be here and to be leading this discussion, or at least introducing it. The topic today is the Michigan Perspective State Priorities for 2015. And let me tell you what we're going to do. You've gone through probably the toughest part. You registered, you got your lunch, and now we're going to sit back. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers today and then have a seat myself. You'll see me. I have the fashionable crutches. The governor and I do not recommend this as a trend you should follow, okay? And I also want to note that we both had our mishaps out of state. So the moral of the story is stay in Michigan, okay? It's a healthy place to be, so. Well, I'm thrilled to have this panel, and especially the day after so much conversation about what the priorities are. And the reason I'm so impressed with these folks is because they, in fact, have been working on behalf of the state of Michigan for a number of years, and their passion and their concern for our state and its success means so much to them. So it's the A team. I remember talking to my director, the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research, about this forum and how we would kick off our 25th year of doing the forums, and laid out this team. And he said, well, you can give it a shot. So we did it. First speaking will be Charles Ballard. Some of you are quite familiar with Dr. Ballard. He is the director of the State of the State Survey and professor of economics at Michigan State University. And as a distinguished economist, he's widely published. He is very conversant on Michigan's economy in a way that most people get it. They get the bottom line. His research has focused on such topics as tax policy, healthcare financing, and Michigan's financial future. So he's shown this in writing. He co-edited the Michigan at the Millennium book, which is a portrait of the state's fiscal and economic structure. And I believe we still have it's still available through Michigan State University Press.
It weighs 4.5 pounds, though.
It does weigh 4.5 pounds. It's my go-to book. Okay. It's my go-to book for the background on all of the topics. Of course, things have changed a little bit over time, but I think the conversation has gotten a little more sophisticated, and Dr. Ballard picks up on that in his second book, which is The Michigan's Economic Future, Challenges and Opportunities. He is also the author of Real Economics for Real People, and has written a general equilibrium model for tax policy evaluation.
They don't want to read that.
But you could. It is available. So following Dr. Ballard will be Doug Smith, and Doug is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Government Affairs for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MEDC. He directs both state and federal relations, and basically, and this is putting it very basic, is that he works with MEDC's statewide network and actually international network of economic development partners, including the Next Energy, all of the chambers of commerce, the Michigan Manufacturing Technology Council. He oversees efforts with the Interdepartmental Collaborative Council and liaisons with the Michigan Economic Development Foundation. He knows a little bit about municipal finance, I believe. He's a real estate broker. He served as the Oakland County's deputy county executive, and he worked with the city of Troy in their real estate and development. So very happy to have you here, Doug, and feel quite honored to have you as part of our panel today. Mr. Studley, Richard Studley, is with us. He became president and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce in July 2008. He's followed the Chamber of Commerce for a good part of his career. Before that, before serving as president and CEO, he was the Chamber's executive vice president. And prior to that, he was the Chamber's chief lobbyist. So he knows the issues all too well. He served as chair, or actually he currently serves as chairman of the U.S. Chambers of Commerce Committee of 100. That represents the top 100 state and local chambers of commerce in the U.S. He also is the chairman of the U.S. U.S. Chambers Accreditation Committee for State and Local Chambers. Too many cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. Mr. Studley received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Alma College and a Master of Science in Administration degree from Central Michigan University. And then prior to joining the Chamber, he served as program director for the Michigan Senate Republican Office, and has also served as city manager for the city of Clare in Michigan. Finally, Paul Hunt. Dr. Hunt is with us. As a Spartan who majored in mathematics and chemistry, he went on to study at both Oxford and Harvard. He came back to MSU and joined the Department of Chemistry as a professor there, but also took on a number of administrative duties, and now serves as the Associate Vice President, or I should say Senior Associate Vice President for Research and Graduate Studies. So thank you for being here, Dr. Hunt. Okay, I am going to take a seat and hand this to Dr. Ballard. Following each of their comments, which will be 12 or 15 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A, and we'll hear from you. We're tweeting our presentations today. We're also filming it, so the conversation will very definitely go outside of this room, helping other people to know what to look for in 2015.
All right. Thanks, Anne-Marie. And
Okay.
I told her that her career in the pole vault is over. So it's a pleasure to be here with you and with these other distinguished speakers. And I want to just run through some basics of where I think the Michigan economy is and where we might go. And my first slide, before you figure out where you want to go, you need to know where you are now. So I'm going to give a little bit of history, and some of this history I think you probably know, but I'm going to put numerical flesh, I hope, on some trends. And if you've seen me give presentations before, this is similar to things that you've seen before, except the data are updated as far as I could go. Manufacturing share has shrunk dramatically, and that has had profound effects, probably more profound on Michigan than on any other state in the country. This graph shows the percentage of the economy that originates in the manufacturing sector, and it goes back to 1963, which is the first year for which we can have data that can be compared across the 50 states. So we've got a half a century of data on this subject. And what you see here is that for the United States as a whole, manufacturing is much less important relatively than it used to be, down from 28% in the 60s to about 12% now. But for Michigan, the drop is much more painful, from about 48% in the 60s down to below 15% in 2009, you can see, and then something of a rebound. But see, even after the rebound, that doesn't really fundamentally change the long-term trend. And so manufacturing, which was the sector that was so phenomenally successful in the middle decades of the 20th century, has been, for a whole variety of reasons, has been shrinking, not just in Michigan, but nationwide. And that means that I don't see this going back up to where it was. It may, but I'm doubtful. I think manufacturing will continue to be an important part of the Michigan economy, but I don't think it's going to be 1956 again. Thus, we're going to have to find new things to do. So partly as a victim of our success with manufacturing, we are below the national average in educational attainment, below the national average in a whole variety of measures of educational attainment. One that I have a slide on is the percentage of the adult population who have a bachelor's degree or more. I want to emphasize, and this echoing what the governor said, I work for a 4-year degree granting institution. I think that those are important institutions. I think for a lot of young people, going to a college or university is the right choice. But that doesn't mean that everybody has to go that route. It's not one size fits all. And so skilled trades, the kind of programs that are available at community colleges, et cetera, this is only one of the measures that shows how we're behind the national average. We have, in fact, increased our fraction of our population who have a bachelor's degree, but we remain below the national average, and the national average is really important because in the last 40 years, one of the spectacular national trends has been the increase in the payoff to having high education, high training, high skill. Often that means a bachelor's degree, but it can mean other things. So, we've got a couple of winds that are going against us. The payoff to education is been growing, but we're less educated than the national average. Manufacturing has been shrinking. Thus, perhaps not surprisingly, per capita incomes in Michigan have fallen relative to the national average. And this slide shows you, and it shows that going back to the 50s, we were, in a typical year, 12 or 13% above the national average. In the last 5 years, we've been 12 to 13% below the national average in per capita income. And in 2013, we ranked 37th of the 50 states for per capita income. Now, that's unadjusted for inflation. If you adjust for inflation, we're 38th among the 50 states. So, so the good news is that if you adjust for inflation, the per capita income is ever so slightly higher in 2013 than it was in 2012, and that's the highest that it's ever been, which I think will come as a surprise to many people in this room. And it's a surprise, I think, because we remain below the national average, and also, especially because of the number 2 here, the benefits of growth haven't reached everyone. The per capita, of course, is just the average, and that is highly weighted by those at the top. And one of the big stories, as you probably know, is that in Michigan and in the rest of the country in the last 40 years, we've had a very pronounced increase in income inequality, with most of the growth accruing to those above the middle. Another piece of good news, bad news. We've had growing employment in Michigan for 5 years. That's good news. That's coming off the worst decade in our economic history, except for the 1930s. And so we are still more than 500,000 jobs below where we were in the spring of 2000, which was when Michigan reached its all-time high. 500,000 is a lot of jobs. Next slide shows you the trend. This is employment in Michigan going back to 1990. And you can see how well we did when Doug Roberts was the treasurer of the state of Michigan. And then long slide and finally bottomed out, and now we've had some growth. But this point here is 500,000, more than 500,000 below that point. Okay, going on. I want to talk, as some of you know, another part of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research is the State of the State Survey, which is a 3 or 4 times a year survey of public attitudes in Michigan, and I'm the director of the survey. Well, here is the time trend on Michigan residents' beliefs about whether they're better off or worse off than a year ago. And better off is in green, which seems entirely appropriate. Worse off is red, which also seems appropriate. And you can see that you can see the roller coaster. And if you, so here's worse off grew tremendously and then has come back down to the lowest value since 2002. And then here's better off, way high, then way down, and then back up. And so these measures, this is how people feel about it. And if you go back one slide, I think you can see that how people feel about it is a fairly decent reflection of how it really is. The employment picture gets reflected in people's subjective views about their own standard of living. So if you go now forward and forward again, I want to make some comments about the policy failures and the policy successes. And I'll start first with policy, what I believe to be policy successes. And I should say that this is just my own opinion and is not necessarily a reflection of has not been vetted by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research or the Department of Economics or Michigan State University. Okay, having said that, let's go on to the next. So success. The thing that has made the biggest difference in the last 5 years to Michigan is the thing that we call the auto rescue, if we're in favor of it, and the auto bailout. Oh, bailout, that's a terrible thing, if you're against it. The folks from the Center for Automotive Research estimate that if we had allowed the auto industry to have a Chapter 7 fire sale crash and burn, which many senators in the U.S. Senate wanted, if that had been allowed to happen, the additional job losses would have been probably in the order of 1 million. And a lot of those job losses would have been in Michigan and Ohio. I think that was a good thing that we didn't allow that crash and burn to happen. Second, success, although it's just a beginning, Detroit's bankruptcy. I don't think that there are many people in this room who thought that we could have gone through the Detroit bankruptcy as well as we went. And it was hard, but we're better off than we were. But let me say that it is necessary but not sufficient. Necessary, the numbers just didn't add up. There was no way that Detroit could go forward without some sort of restructuring of the finances. But that doesn't mean that 10 years from now Detroit is necessarily going to be in good shape. Tremendous amount of work still needs to be done. Next. Success, another one, only the beginning, but I think one of the biggest successes of the Snyder administration has been the expansion of access to early childhood education. If I could, somebody once asked me, what are your top 3 priorities? And I said, education, education, education. There's nothing that's going to pay off more than this. Although, of course, it won't bear full fruit for 15, 20, 25 years. But just because if I were to plant a tree today, I might not live to rest in the shade of that tree. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't plant the tree. So I'm glad that we're doing that, making that long-term investment. I also think a huge success, the expansion of access to health insurance. 500,000 people are now insured under the Healthy Michigan Plan. So that's a series of successes. Now, the next one is 3 successes that all have, and some of you may or may not agree with all of these. If you agreed with all of them, it'd be boring. The common theme is we have a more rational tax structure than we used to. Number 1, elimination of the MBT. Now, many of you know me as a progressive, and some of my conservative detractors have called me a liberal, which is, like axe murderer or child molester. I mean, what could be worse than a liberal? And many of my liberal friends scratch their heads when I say that I'm in favor of the elimination of the MBT. The MBT had some god-awful features, which I won't go into detail, but it really had some very, very inefficient features. I'm glad we got rid of it, but then I will say, putting back my liberal progressive hat, but I would have replaced more revenue. We've just recently got internet taxation, which I think is, or at least the beginnings of it, which is a step in the right direction. The notion that you can walk into Macy's and buy something and you have to pay tax, but if you buy the same thing by internet, you don't, is crazy, both from the perspective of fairness and efficiency. And then this last one, taxation of pension income. This is another one where many of my friends on the progressive side of the political spectrum are puzzled. In fact, my friend Mark Schauer made it one of the centerpieces of his gubernatorial campaign. But the theme here is you've got to shore up revenue. because one of our biggest problems is that we've given away revenue, given away revenue, given away revenue. And you know, the governor talked a lot last night about the need to have greater efficiency in government. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, we want to get it as much out of every dollar that we spend as possible. But he couldn't come up with enough efficiency to pave our roads without money. And I don't think the tooth fairy is going to pay our bills. And you gotta get your revenue. And so in terms of the taxation of pension income, my other thing is nobody has yet successfully explained to me why the duties of citizenship will stop when I retire. Maybe somebody can convince me, but I think I'm going to retire sometime in the next 10 years, and I think I'll still be a citizen. And it would be offensive to me to have the kind of income I expect as a retired person and pay no tax on it, and to have the nurse's aide be making $26,000 a year and pay more tax. Okay, failure, massive disinvestment in higher education, and I won't say more about it. Failure, our roads are a disgrace. I'm hopeful that we can solve that problem, and I'm going to vote yes on May 5th. Failure, the maroon monopoly remains intact. More on that in a minute. My top priorities. Okay, instead of saying education, 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 I said education, training, skill. But there's a common theme. Okay. And this is a long-term thing. I think we've got to do a lot more from preschool to PhD. And I'll tell you my favorite hobby horse, which has gained no traction in Lansing because I think it would cost money. The whole rest of the developed world has a K through 12 school year of 190 days, 200, 210, 220. We have 180, which de facto means 170 in a lot of districts, which if kids don't show up means 160 or 100 or 90 or 20. We just don't spend enough time in the classroom, and if I were the governor, and if I were advising the governor, which I sometimes do, I would extend the school year to 200 days. A vote yes on May 5th. We can't allow to let our roads crumble. It's not a perfect bill. The financing mechanism is not what I or any economist would have chosen, and we can talk more about that. But it's the only game in town. Not only does it allow us to at least begin to repair our transportation infrastructure, but it includes a return of the earned income tax credit to where it was 4 years ago, and that it's one of the few places where we've done something for lower middle income working families in Michigan, and that I think is a very important part of the package. So I'll vote for it. I hope we can build the new bridge over the Detroit River, and number 3, don't cut taxes. I hope that the legislature will have the good sense to not throw away more revenue. We've discovered in recent days that we've thrown away more revenue than we thought, and that's creating budget problems. Don't throw away revenue. The tooth fairy is not going to pay for public services. And finally, the 8-mile road is the Berlin Wall of Michigan. This is Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne counties from the 2000 census, color-coded by race and ethnicity. And that line, that straight line, is 8-Mile Road. There's more discussion of racial issues in America than there was a year ago. I think that's okay. I think we need to continue to talk about it. Detroit's problems were all often laid at the feet of corruption and mismanagement, and that was part of the problem. But the Quamster was at the very tail end of a long process. And if any city loses the kind of population that Detroit loses, it's going to be in trouble. And there's a very prominent racial dimension to that. So next slide. I think we need to start tearing down the Berlin Wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And it'll take years because race is clearly the most difficult issue in America. But I think we need to keep trying. And last but not least, yes, I want to sing. Some of you have been subjected to this more than once. This is your state song. It's to the tune of "Oh Christmas Tree." Let's do it. A song to thee, fair state of mine, Michigan, my Michigan. But greater song than this is thine, Michigan, my Michigan. The whisper of the forest tree, the thunder of the inland sea, unite in one grand symphony of Michigan, my Michigan. Give yourselves a big round of applause.
Well, thank you very much, Anne Marie, for having me here. And if my math is right, you were 14 when the first forum occurred, so that's pretty impressive to be here that long. See a number of good friends out there, and it's a pleasure to be here on this distinguished panel. And kind of to respond to Charles' outline of where we've been and where we're at now, and just from the perspective of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to talk about the policies and procedures. So mine's a macro level to try to just list the things that I think are going to be very important for us to address, and then maybe we can talk in questions and answers about how we might address those issues. But within Michigan Economic Development, we have a number of programs, but our mission is very simple, and it really is to help create jobs. It's to help companies stay here, expand here, attract new companies in, brand this state with our Pure Michigan brand. We're very excited. We've got a new CEO as we start the year. Steve Arwood, who came over from Lara and has been our COO for about 4 months. And Mike Pinney hasn't gone very far. He went over to the governor's office as senior advisor, so we've got the blend of both. But I think Steve's background from the private sector as well as his government background allows him to hit the ground running to deal with a lot of the things that I'm going to just mention here in a few minutes. How many of you went to the auto show? All those who haven't, you should go down. If any of you were there in 2009, it was a death walk, and we weren't sure there was going to be a 10. This year was very exciting. The number of releases and models, the cars, the exhibits themselves, but the spirit that was there. Hard to believe that just 5 years ago, that we had one that we weren't sure we were going to have another one. So our goal, really, at the broadest sense, is how do we, as a state, become, and I say become, globally competitive. I think we are, but we're going to have to do a lot to stay globally competitive and to win this battle in terms of the economic growth of the state and creating jobs. And our strategy and our assessment of the situation is very simple, because there's the big three have got to be encased in everything we do. And that is first advanced manufacturing and design. And that starts with the auto industry. But it's also agriculture, our second largest industry, and it's tourism. Those are the three major sectors that drive the economy of this state. And so they need to be considered in all of the programs that we talk about. And our path forward is relatively clear to us. And Charles has talked about it before. Number one, the governor talked about it last night, is talent, is that skilled workforce gap that exists. Whatever state takes its resources and provides the kind of training and certification and education for its citizens so that they can have careers and jobs will be the winner in this economic battle. And governor's going to lead, I think, and the legislative help implement the kinds of things that we need to go forward in. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But the second element of that path is innovation. And by innovation, I mean usable technology. And nowhere in the world do I think we have more resources to do that than here in Michigan. So we're very blessed, but we've got to use it effectively. And third is exports. The growth of this economy is not going to be internal in Michigan. The growth of this, and this goes especially to the agricultural sector. Some of the estimates are we could be having 4 and 5 times more agricultural goods here. We're the second most. We're the state with the second greatest variety of agricultural goods in the world. That gets overshadowed by the auto industry, but it's in exporting those agricultural goods around the world that's going to help this economy grow. You had to be impressed, at least I was, with the North American International Auto Show. And although the pace and amount of the technology that was there, certainly for an old guy like me, was stunning. I mean, the pace is just, you think about the car changes and the technology that occurs there. But then you stop and think about Michigan. And this goes to this innovation issue. And we just had a recent study came out. 76% of all the research and development in the North American auto industry is done here in Michigan. 76%. Now we're going to have to fight to keep that. I believe that if we don't build the manufacturing sector, you won't keep R&D where manufacturing is in the long term. But we certainly have that. And particularly in the context of the tenure we lost 10 days ago in Congress. We lost 100 years of tenure. We lost 6 chairs. That's going to take a long time to replace that. So our access to federal funds are going to be more difficult. But we won 3 big awards. The first was ALMI, which is the American Lightweight Materials Manufacturing Innovation Institute. $70 million of federal money to center the research on lightweight manufacturing here in Michigan. 79 companies committed $85 million as a match for that. That's hugely important that we get into the R&D of the federal government. Last week, just at the auto show, they announced the Institute for Advanced Composites Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Here, it was $70 million again, but 122 entities all throughout Southeast Michigan and beyond. MSU is the lead on composites for light and heavy-duty vehicles. We put in, as MEDC, $15 million over 5 years into the Institute. But again, centralizing the research being done by the federal, funded by the federal government, being done here, being centered here is hugely important. We also won an earlier one in investing in manufacturing communities program. And what that does is put about 8 states in the lead and a priority for federal funding for research and development. Those 3 awards are hugely important in our ability to access federal funds in the near future for innovation. And they shouldn't go kind of unnoticed. The next issue is the skill gap. And I don't want to talk endlessly about it because Charles gave you a good picture of it. The governor talked about it last night quite a bit. But that's clearly the number one issue. There isn't a company that we work with today that the number one issue is I don't have the skilled workforce that I need. And it's everything from welders all the way through engineers of all types. And we have a huge gap, a huge skills gap. We have 80,000 opportunities now on our talent portal. And we have 80,000 people looking for work, and something's wrong here when we have that kind of immense skill gap. And the answer, I think, is at least threefold, 3 real important elements. One is STEM education, and we're calling it now kind of career and technical education, which is the broadest span, but STEM. And I mean to emphasize, as the governor does, this has got to start at the elementary school, the high school. There's a couple of programs now that are creating middle colleges, and it's basically a 5-year program that you go through high school and you graduate in the 5th year with an associate's degree or a certificate. I think we have to never denigrate the 4-year degree or the 2-year associate's degree, but there's lots of other training going on that's invaluable, as you saw from Charles's data. Most of our kids don't go on to finish higher education. So we've got to start right there at the high school level and before if we're going to do this in the STEM education period. The STEM education programs are where a lot of our attention has to be. Immigration, and the governor's talked quite a bit about this, is another area that helps us deal with this skill gap. And then finally, I think a real key, and it's one in programs that we certainly have evidenced at MEDC, and this is employers have got to be engaged with the educational sector if this is going to work. We have Community Ventures program where we've put nearly 2,000 structurally unemployed people to work, but it's because we started with the employer, we started with a job, we identified the students, we got the commitment not only of the company, but we wrapped the social services around them. So they had transportation and dental care and home care and health care if they needed it, and kind of brought our programs together. And this goes back to the theme the governor had last night. We've got to stop thinking about and judging ourselves and measuring ourselves about the programs and activities we have and start really looking at the people we impact and how we impact them. And that means how do we get them through the career that they want to have. And that career doesn't have to always be a 4-year education. It can be a certification. And welders are coming out of school today and making $80,000 and raising a family and contributing to their community. And somehow we've got to put that balance in the priorities of our school systems. And so that'll be certainly a focus that we have. But again, I think the real key in this is going to be employer engagement with the educational sector. And there's been a lot of work and education programs, but somehow the employers have got to be there at the table if this is going to succeed. And I just mentioned the governor has an economic summit with this target on March 2nd and 3rd at the Detroit Marriott. And it's really it's all about this skills gap. We're dealing with the 10 regions and have centered our programs around those 10 regions. And that's the next thing I'd like to just mention, because it's also kind of, I think in the background, and that is the governor has established 10 regional prosperity regions around the state. And he recognizes that economic development is not a municipal sport. It's not even a county sport. It needs to be a group of counties working together. The end result and the purpose behind the prosperity regions was first for us to get our act together. When I started 4 years ago, I had 20 maps that I sat down and looked at. They were all service providers to local economic development, and they were all different. And I knew that from working at the local level. I never could figure out who my SBDC person was or who my MMTC person was. And we had umbilical cords to all these services. Now with the prosperity regions, we have teams of people working together to service a county. And the end result of this should be that we end up having the region itself sit down and talk about what their assets are. That's everything from the characteristics of their workforce, to what are the company clusters they have, to what's the supply chain they have, to what are the natural resource base, what's the logistical advantage they may have, what's the energy infrastructure they have. Once I have that asset base, I can then as a region determine how I'm going to create jobs. What's the strategy for economic development in that region? And the 10 regions aren't to be walls between regions. The regions can work together. But it means putting together an effective plan at a regional level for growing the economy in that region. And I think that's part of the fabric that's moving forward that is going to be absolutely critical. If business engagement with education is key to that. Key to the government programs is going to be that we make the regions work. All of the state departments have now, to one degree or another, in most cases, have fully implemented these 10 regions. So now we don't have to fight over each other, trying to figure out who's got what responsibility. But workforce development and the regional planning commissions and economic developers and human services all have the same regions, and so we become teams of people working. And I think one of the things we hadn't talked about when we created the prosperity regions, that may be the best outcome, is that when we sit in Lansing today and ask about and find a problem or an issue, the first thing I hear is, "Oh crap, we could have 10 solutions to this problem." Yes, we could. And it means we have to listen to what the locals know about their economy. We have to let them direct us. We have to figure out what they want. They've developed a plan for how they're going to grow their economy. Our job then is to use the resources we have to help them get there, as opposed to coming in and saying, we know best how you should grow your economy. We can help them, we can give them information, but I think this is the regional approach has stopped Lansing in its tracks, because now they know there's not just one answer to any question or issue. There's going to be at least 10 and probably more than that, and I think that's pretty healthy. I just mentioned a couple of other areas. We've abdicated, or we've allowed Chicago to be the center of transportation for the United States for many, many years. I grew up in Chicago, so it's my hometown, but that's okay. It's time we took it back. Detroit sits in the center of the North American population of business and people. When you look at Canada, the United States, and Mexico, which is really what we should be looking at, North America as our economic engine. We've really not taken the locational advantage we have, the border crossings that we have, and understood that what we need to do is make sure all of our companies know that this is the place to be. We've got a logisticals background. Some of the logistics companies coming out of the auto industry, we need to show companies that they can be here, they can export anywhere in the world through our doorways, and we've got to get better at the logistics, and it's the issue of the whole supply chain. And so we need to be a transportation hub for North America as we move forward. Finally, one of the other areas is the energy infrastructure. We oftentimes lose some of our battles because the price of energy is not competitive in some of the deals that we have in trying to attract companies here. But we've got to get beyond that. We do have to talk about developing new energy capacity in the state. We have to talk about price. We have to talk about reliability. All of those things factor in, but we've got to have a better energy policy, and you're going to hear the governor talked last night about establishing and bringing together all of the energy pockets that we have in state government into one new agency, and I think that's very critical if we're going to attract. And then the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room, I think, is municipal finance. While there's a piece of it there that is there in the May 5th vote on transportation. It's not sufficient to be able to really resolve the issue. Detroit's now got a firm platform from which to work. I agree with Charles. We've got a lot of work to do. I think we're up for the battle. I think we've got a great mayor down there to do that. But the issue is not just the Flints and the Saginaw's and Benton Harbors, it's the Lansings, the Kalamazoo's. And so we need to find a way to fund our municipalities across the state. And I think that's the kind of elephant in the room. And the real challenge that we face, and we see it almost every day, and it was summed up in a speech at the North American Auto Show that I listened to, and one of the noted economists there said, the real problem we have is we know what some of the answers are, and he was talking about the infrastructure and the bridge, et cetera, which I agree is one of our critical factors, and I'll quote the governor, 2020, it will be built. But the issue is that, it takes 30 days to have a new app. It takes 30 months to create a new car. It takes 30 years to build the infrastructure. And there was a comment about the educational sector, and that's what it takes. So that's part of the problem is part of our issues are the infrastructure that we need, but it takes many, many years to kind of rebuild that infrastructure. And so this isn't something that we're going to turn around and change overnight. And so, final words is, vote in May, vote yes in May. I think the transportation package may not have been ideal, but it has a little bit of something for everybody, which is what I think compromise is all about. Support regionalism, understand its importance. And then finally, attend the Governor's Economic Summit. So again, thank you very much for having me.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Anne Marie and Michigan State University for the opportunity to participate on this panel today. Doug talked a little bit about the need for the business community to re-engage in the area of education. I agree. I'm about to do something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I'm going to go back to college. Next month I'll be attending my first Board of Trustees meeting at Central Michigan University. And I'm doing that with support from the Michigan Chamber's Executive Committee and Board of Directors. I do think you're going to see employers re-engage in the debate over education across the state at the local level and at the regional level as well. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Michigan Chamber, we're a statewide business organization. We represent about 6,700 job providers across the state. We represent companies of every size and type in all 83 of Michigan's counties. Michigan Chamber members employ about 1.5 million Michigan residents. So our mission is pretty straightforward. We exist to promote conditions favorable to job creation and business growth in Michigan. My job is to fight for the home team. Former Detroit Mayor Coleman Young, it was mentioned earlier I was a city manager. And one of the first times I came to Lansing after graduating from college, I was attending a Michigan Municipal League legislative conference. And at that conference, Mayor Young spoke. And when he was talking about some of the challenges facing our largest city, I'll always remember that he said there were a few social welfare problems facing the city of Detroit that wouldn't be made better if more of his residents didn't have a good job. And so I think that's stayed with me over the years as we've worked on a variety of issues. If you visit the Michigan Chamber's website at michamber.com, you'll see and hear some of the materials that we've talked about, either videos or background information. I am involved with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I do attend and participate in the Council of State Chambers. And in talking about where we were and where we're heading, 2 years after being on the job, I attended the winter meeting of the Council of State Chambers. Most of the state chamber executives around the country know each other. We're tough competitors but good friends. My wife and I ended up at dinner sitting with my counterpart from the state of Texas and his wife. And we're getting to know each other, and in the middle of the dinner, and Bill's a bit of a cowboy, as you might guess, sort of a gruff guy. He leaned over and put his hand on my arm, actually kind of frightened me. And he leaned in and he said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I thought maybe he knew something about my board of directors that I didn't. But I said, "Bill, I'm sorry, I just don't understand." And I looked at my wife and I thought, do I look ill? And he said, "Well, we're really growing here in Texas. And an awful lot of the people who've moved to Texas recently are from Michigan. And so we're just concerned about the future of Michigan. Is your state going to make it?" And I assured him that we would. Fast forward to 2 years ago, and I was elected to the U.S. Chamber's Board of Directors. And at my first meeting in Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to meet business leaders from across the country. We have an 84-member Board of Directors at the State Chamber. There are over 100 business leaders on the board at the U.S. Chamber. And how times can change. At that meeting, I was asked the same three questions again and again for 2 days. One was, will Detroit make it? What is the future of Detroit? Across the country, people care about our state and our nation's great cities, but I was reminded that if you haven't had the privilege to live and work in Michigan, for people on the East Coast and the West Coast, maybe all you know about Michigan is about Detroit or the auto industry, and until recently those stories haven't always been positive. The other question I got was, did you really become a right-to-work state? How did you become a right-to-work state? Are you going to stay a right-to-work state? And the third question I got was an easy one. Are those Pure Michigan ads true? A couple of years ago, when Governor Blanchard started that program, it was Yes Michigan, and he deserves a lot of credit for that program. We needed, I think, a dose of optimism about the future. Governor Granholm continued the program, and I know it's working because a few years ago I would go to a meeting with other chamber executives and not hear anything about those ads. Now the question I get from my counterparts in other states is, when are you going to stop running those damn ads? So I was asked if those ads were true. I tell everyone who doesn't live here, no, they're not true. Our state is even more beautiful than those ads. The point about right to work is that we agree with Governor Snyder that legislation was pro-worker. It is about allowing employees to choose whether or not they want to be in a union. And I talked with one of our members today who works at a unionized company in a unionized industry in a part of the state where there's a high level of unionization, and she reported to us that it didn't change a thing. And my reaction was, well, that's just fine. But it did improve our state's economic competitiveness. When Michigan was faced with a situation where Indiana, a good neighbor, but a tough competitor for jobs, became a right-to-work state, I know from my discussions with their CEO in Indiana, they were planning a multi-million-dollar campaign to attract job providers in West Michigan to keep their workforce, keep their customers, and just move over the border into Indiana. So one of the themes I wanted to share with you today is really about our state's economic competitiveness. Our belief at the Michigan Chamber is because of smart policies and strong leadership on the part of Governor Snyder and legislative leaders on both sides of the aisle. We are improving our state's economic competitiveness. 3 years ago, through the Michigan Chamber Foundation, our nonpartisan educational program, we worked with Dr. Tim Nash at Northwood University, Keith Priddy, the president of Northwood. We wanted to work with Charlie, but he's so darn busy these days, and we just couldn't afford him to do the study. We went with Northwood. But when we did our first study 3 years ago, we ended up creating an econometric model. We now look at over 200 economic variables, comparing Michigan with every other state in the country. And it was my assignment to report to the governor the preliminary results before we released the study. Our first study in 2012 showed that we were 47th hooray for New York, hooray for California. The governor's staff was not very excited about that study, but when the governor heard of it, he said, well, I know there was room for improvement, and now we have a measuring stick to evaluate our progress. In 2013, we jumped up to 39th. In 2014, we jumped to 30th. Still plenty of room for improvement, but the point there is that good public policy doesn't happen by accident. And when we focus on job creation and economic growth, that is the very best guarantee we can have that there will be adequate revenue for police, for fire, for public works, for education, and all of our essential services. Today we're making good progress, but there's plenty of room for improvement as we go forward together. Employment is up, unemployment is down, our economy is more competitive. Too many of our friends and neighbors and relatives are still unemployed or underemployed. At the Michigan Chamber, we're very member-driven and policy-focused. Every year we hold 7 regional meetings. Last year, we heard something very different at 3 of those meetings, and it complements what Charlie and Doug have said earlier. At 3 of those meetings, members spoke up during the meeting or came up afterwards and said, Rich, we don't need any more people like you. We don't need any more people with master's degrees. We don't need any more people with 4-year college degrees. I talked to a manufacturer from the Jackson area. He said, I need welders. This is a small, advanced manufacturer with plenty of opportunities for growth. We have members in the construction industry who are concerned about an aging workforce and don't know where the next generation of equipment operators will come from. We must continue to have great universities and support those who want to go on to get a 4-year degree or a law degree or an advanced degree. I agree with Charlie and Doug, those are good things. But many of the jobs in the future will require high school plus. And that message is coming through very loud and very clear now from our members. Throughout the last downturn, we had members in manufacturing. We had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 vacancies that they could not fill. Tier 1 and Tier 2 auto suppliers involved in developing prototypes, environmental testing, they didn't need people with 4 years degrees. They needed high school plus, a license, a certificate, an apprenticeship, or an associate's degree. And so we need to retarget and refocus. I'm a product of Michigan's public school system. All of my children have attended public schools. I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for extraordinary teachers who cared about me. And we've got a lot of good school districts, I want to be very clear. But what we're hearing from job providers around the state is that in too many parts of our state, young people graduate from high school with high self-esteem. They're then enrolled in Michigan State University or other great universities and find that they need to take remedial classes to have the English language skills or the math skills that they need to succeed as college freshmen. If your parents don't own or operate a business today, too many young people graduate from Michigan's high schools, and the only experience they have with business is on the customer side of the counter. When I was a kid, we had work-study programs, apprenticeships, internships. We've got to get back to that. We're expecting that we'll have great debates this year about education, about health care, about our transportation infrastructure, and I just kind of wanted to lay that foundation for the discussion we'll have. But I want to be clear with you, at the Michigan Chamber, we are optimistic about our state's future. I think the greatest challenge we face is we have to recognize that we are in a fierce national and international competition for jobs. We cannot slow down. We have to keep moving forward together as fast as we possibly can. So that's part of my message to you today. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon.
I probably am the least politically accomplished person in the room. I'm a physical scientist when I'm not doing research and graduate studies administration for MSU. And hearing the earlier speakers makes me feel that I'm probably going to be the odd duck here in the flock. But I do want to address a couple of points in terms of the necessity for Michigan to pay attention to some policy priorities that might otherwise escape our notice, and try and tie those points to the points that the earlier speakers have made. Mr. Studley talked a little bit about the demographics in the state. I went this morning to the U.S. Census website and pulled out the most recent U.S. Census projection on state-by-state population that they have published on that site, which is several years old at this point. But it was pretty interesting because it said in the state of Michigan, between 2000 and 2030, they anticipated the state's population would grow 7.6% compared to a national population growth rate of 29.2%. And they also said that the Michigan population above the age of 65 would grow by 70.7% compared to a national growth of 104.2%. And those numbers are interesting by themselves, but they become in some regards even more interesting if you toss out the percentages and actually look at the actuals. And so they're showing a total growth in the state over that 30-year period of 755,000 in round numbers, and a growth in the population above the age of 65 of 861,000. So the point here is the population of people under the age of 65 is actually projected by the Census Bureau to decline over that 30-year period. So we're looking at one of many demographic trends. There are others that you can look at on gender and on race and ethnicity and so forth, which all of which combine to create a set of boundary conditions that I think the citizens of the state will look to their policy leaders, their legislators and civil servants to be paying attention to with a time horizon that is substantial. There will be effects in Washington. There'll be effects in Congress. There'll be all kinds of effects that drive on this. I also think that the state, knowing what's going to happen with the age demographic, could be paying attention to how one utilizes the retiree population of the state that has high-tech skills or human caring skills or any other kind of valuable skill to society in a more effective way. That's an area where leadership, I would respectfully suggest, is needed. A second trend that I want to talk about is big data. We all hear about big data. Some of us follow Nate Silver's political polling. Some of us know about the big data that's collected by Amazon or Google or various folks. What I'm afraid we're not paying attention to as a state, and where there's a public policy issue, is the big data that will be collected by government. And I say the word will be collected by government because if we do not have data collection efforts and policy to address citizen privacy and to address human subjects research concerns and to address when data may or may not be commercialized and so forth, other people will make those policies for us, and it's going to happen. The question is not whether there will be a data strategy that applies to Michigan citizens, but it will be instead which government or government plural entities are actually involved in making that. I want to back that claim up by reference to a $450 million RFP, which was issued by the federal government in April of 2014. Mr. Obama went to Pennsylvania at a community college and announced this, and the RFP is available on the net. And one of the funding options in that was, and I quote here, improve statewide data integration and use. this could include a plan to integrate data systems that contain both employment and educational outcomes data through a single unified data warehouse or data management system, or a plan to create record linkages between separate data systems. And it further goes on to talk about integrating data on students in both credit and non-credit courses and programs into institutional and statewide data systems. And it further goes on to say that applicants in states that have not yet developed a statewide longitudinal data system for post-secondary education could propose the development of a database that would include all the community colleges in the state, along with as many public four-year institutions and private institutions as possible to track common reporting elements. So what does that mean? What it means is that if I'm a university administrator or a professor like my colleague here, and I care about this sort of thing, or I work at a community college or one of the state's 501c3s, the federal government is dangling a very large carrot in front of our face saying, how about building data systems that will eventually do cradle-to-grave tracking of people's educational coursework, and we're going to cross-reference that with their subsequent employment data and their wage history, and this will allow us to evaluate higher education as well as K-12 education throughout the country. You may think that's a good idea. You may think that's a bad idea. It's not my job, and I don't have the expertise to tell you which it is. But I do think that the public policy leadership needs to understand that if we do not have a Michigan strategy that addresses the collection, custodianship, privacy, integrity, and use of large data stores, this is going to happen by default, and there are many actors who will cause it to happen external to the state if we don't address it ourselves. So that's kind of my second suggested priority. First was, what do we do with the expertise of our retirees? The second, what do we do about a state data policy? The third and final one that I want to share with you today is to really argue that the good efforts that are being made by the government with MEDC and by the private organizations such as the State Chamber and by the businesses and individuals of the state toward economic development can usefully add to their toolbox two things. One, attention to the role of our firms in the high-tech sector to an under-attended to high technology supply chain, and to colonizing any given part of that supply chain, the beginning, the middle, or the end, but then using that point of colonization to reach into the other parts to try and capture as much or more of it as possible. And second, to notice that our international, sometimes competitors and sometimes colleagues, are voting with their feet about that same issue. And I want to share one approximate statistic. This isn't true to three significant figures, but as a rule of thumb, you know, people go to university, they get a bachelor's degree, they get maybe master's degree or professional degree, doctoral degree if they're a researcher. What comes next? Well, what comes next is postdoctoral research. 1/4 of the postdoctoral researchers at Michigan State University, as we sit here this afternoon, come to us from China at the PRC's expense. They have an outfit called the China Scholarship Council that's sending those people over, and they're paying their salary and their travel and everything else for them to be here. What that's telling us is that the university, and I'm not just talking about FRIB or the cyclotron laboratory or that, we get this in environmental policy and geographic information systems and electrical engineering and all kinds of disciplines. The university is attracting foreign government supported postdoctoral researchers because of the quality of what's going on here. I have to assume the same thing is true at U of M and other universities in the state as well as the country. But, you know, we're talking about more than 100 people in this category. So the question is, how do we think about the question of can we keep some of that talent here at the end of the visit? How do we think about the question of seeing the entire educational supply chain from pre-kindergarten through the postdoctoral world, where there are some points of just incredible strength in the United States, not just in Michigan or at MSU, but throughout the United States, but cause that to reach to the parts that previous speakers have talked about in which the strength is not so apparent. I think that one of the issues of this colonizing the supply chain part that is economic development rather than K-12. I'll share a story with you about the MSU Bioeconomy Institute, which I oversee in Holland, Michigan. This institute was due to a donation by Pfizer when they offshored Lipitor production. The MEDC has been extremely generous in supporting it. The U.S. government has given it a proof of concept center grant for helping companies. But it's a very high-tech deal. We have people, some of them with a doctoral degree and some of them with associate's degrees who work there, most of whom worked there earlier for Pfizer, and the university capped to maintain the saving remnant, if you will, of the expertise that had been there during the pharmaceutical operation. But we are attracting companies from around the country and companies with international reach for the high technology that chemical production produces. So that, for example, if you take your handheld device and you do a Google search on a company called Verdesign, you will discover that they have a press release out that said they made the first metric ton of their bio-based nylon 612 precursor at the MSU Bioeconomy Institute in one press release. And in another press release, you'll find that the government of Malaysia gave them $48 million in funding to build a plant in Kuala Lumpur, and President Obama was there for signing the agreement. Now, we weren't. We did our job when we did the proof of concept. That was our one little point on this long supply chain of high technology deployment. But the question is, how does Michigan then say, okay, you came here for this purpose, let's tell you about all the other good things we can do along the entire supply chain. There's an outfit in Atlanta called Renmatics. They have a plant in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. We did the same kind of work for them. BASF has poured a bunch of money into them to build a plant in Pennsylvania. UPM, which you've probably never heard of, but it was a 20,000 employee outfit in Finland, gave them a bunch of money to build a plant in Finland. The question is, well, maybe they'd like to build a plant in the UP. Can we take the point on the high-tech end of the supply chain that we're attacking and make that work? Another company whose name under non-disclosure I can't mention, but is a Caltech spinoff, came to us with a chemical that is used as a catalyst in one of these new hepatitis C drugs that you're hearing about that offer great hope for people who confront that challenge. And we did the workup for them successfully, and it's actually in chain of supply. But again, the question is, sooner or later, if that thrives, as we anticipate it will, our capacity will be exceeded, and the question is there a way of turning that into a Michigan presence? And so, third proposition, and it's true in the educational pipeline and it's true in the high-tech industrial pipeline, is when you're good at one part of the supply chain, how do you reach out to the rest of it to bring it home to Michigan? So those are my three suggestions, and I appreciate your attention.
we're opening for questions. I can tell you, I hear a lot of consistencies with what we've heard over the last couple of days, with added framework for addressing those priorities. For instance, the education, training, skill, and filling in the skill gaps there is definitely something that's been mentioned at both the state and the national level. But also building on our assets, manufacturing, agriculture, tourism. What can we do more in those areas to build tech innovation and R&D? Another topic that was brought up just by Dr. Hunt was the talent of our retirees. So talent overall is a big question, and how we can better manage that was a big part of our discussion among our panelists. Some things very complex, some things not so complicated. Fix our roads, build that bridge, vote yes. I think we can handle those things. I liked hearing about the conversation that needs to be had here, and that is one was regarding race issues. We need to continue that conversation. Secondly was I believe, Doug, you mentioned we not only need to look at programs, but what we really need to look at is the impact that we're having on people, or the impact that we're not having, and really look at it from that perspective. I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the comment about we need to really look at our citizens and give them an education, a career, a skill that they can carry on and have a sustainable future and an economic success with, not only here today, but ongoing. So I'd really like to hear some of your reaction as well as some of your questions to the panelists regarding the discussion.
Hi, Rich.
Hi.
I know from your Twitter feed you weren't super happy with the vote coming out on the road funding plan, but when will we know if the chamber's going to support it?
For the last 10 years, the Michigan Chamber was a very strong advocate to solve this problem through the legislative process with user fees to fix the roads and improve public transit. We have not taken a position for or against the ballot proposal, and the direction I've received from our volunteer leaders is to spend the next few weeks, maybe the next couple of months, making sure that first we listen to our members. I've talked with some members of the Capitol Press Corps who want people to decide yesterday. And I've had to remind a couple of reporters that for our members in retailing and the hospitality industry, for example, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's are the three busiest parts of the year. Business people really didn't lay awake on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve searching the internet to find out about this proposal. I talked with two local chambers last week, good local chambers, but different memberships in different parts of the state. And I think a lot of business people are just like everyday folks. They're now just becoming aware of this proposal and what's in it and what does it do or what doesn't do. So we're going to listen very carefully to our members. We're going to gather as much information as we can and then independently review that. So I think it's going to be a little while. It does look like this is a proposal, and I think it was very well intentioned, but it's a dramatic shift away from user fees to general revenue to fix the roads. That's a dramatic change in tax policy. Higher education is removed from the state constitution for the first time. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? There are hundreds of millions of dollars in spending in this proposal that don't have anything to do with fixing the roads. So I'm afraid what we have is a very complicated ballot proposal that is a tax increase, a tax shift, a dramatic increase in spending, and so we're going to try and study that very carefully and be very cautious. I can tell you that we have a very large and very diverse membership. The feedback we've gotten so far has been quite mixed. It is starting to look as though this is a proposal that would hurt some segments of our membership in exchange for the promise to help others. If you're a retailer, and especially if you sell a big ticket item, think car, boat, RV, motorcycle, appliance, jewelry, furniture, retailers are appropriately concerned about the impact of a 16.6% increase in the sales tax would have on their business. Our members in the construction industry, as you might imagine, their reaction is more supportive. So it's a very complicated issue for an organization like ours, and I think we'll make a good decision eventually. I don't know what it is. I don't know if the ballot proposal will pass or fail. I do know that win or lose on November 5th, the problem won't go away. So, we'll stay at it. But we're going to, at the Michigan Chamber, we're going to look at all three options: support, oppose, or be neutral. And I do think you'll start to see different business groups all over the board on this proposal, with some supporting, some opposing, and some being neutral.
Very good.
Hello, my name is Brenda Carter. I'm with the Pontiac School District Board of Education. I'm also currently the Vice President of Michigan Association of School Boards. Of course, what I heard today was enlightening. A lot of it I knew about, especially the initiative to push skilled trades back into public education. My question for you, some of the things I heard was really, really exciting, like looking at utilizing our senior and retired population in lieu of not having the young people available. But my question particularly to you, Mr. Rich, can I call you Rich?
Sure.
Thank you. Is with the Chamber, and I'm a member of Pontiac Chamber of Commerce as well, how aggressively are you looking into going back into the school systems and maybe offering some type of internship, apprenticeship in the business sector?
Our focus here in Lansing is more on public policy. There are a lot of local chambers that are very actively involved. And I think you're going to get the best input or feedback from local business people. And the reports we get are very mixed. As I travel around the state, there are parts of the state where the business community works very closely with local school boards and the ISDs and community colleges. There are other parts of the state, frankly, where the reports are not so good. And so it's very uneven right now, but I do think you are going to see the business community re-engage. We've got to get teachers into places of business again. And I do think we've got to go back to work-study and apprenticeships. We have some manufacturers in Macomb County who are going to go back to European-style apprenticeship programs, where they'll be reaching out to teachers and students in middle school to get them to do a field trip to their place of business, to try and identify students who have an interest in manufacturing and to offer them a summer job, working in the warehouse. And kids who do well at that are going to be offered part-time work. And the part-time job will turn into an apprenticeship and a full-time job. So it's interesting to see employers really kind of accepting more responsibility for having to be more clear with school districts about what they need. We agreed with Governor Granholm that we needed higher standards for math and science and foreign language. We saw those watered down or rolled back a bit under the guise of local control. And so I think that's a challenge for all of us. We've got to have local control. How do you keep high standards? I think you're going to see a lot of good leadership from local chambers on this issue. And we're going to continue to support high standards. And to be fair, you have to make sure that the school districts are adequately funded too. School districts get a lot of demands these days that you didn't have when I was a kid. Taking care of children whose parents are children, taking care of children from homes where they don't get a lot of encouragement and support, or they don't have adequate nutrition. So we're mindful of the demands on schools. But my sense is, after a few years of kind of pulling back, employers are going to re-engage, because we need and want the school districts to be successful.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, I'm City Councilman Randy Carter, also from Pontiac. Actually, I have twofold questions. One is for Mr. Paul Hunt. As an automotive engineer, is there any reason why automobiles are still only 15% efficient after 100 years?
I'm not sure that I can do that question justice in this
I'm-
setting, but I'll be
understood.
glad to send you something. I mean, there are limits on efficiency due to the Carnot theorem in thermodynamics, but we're not clearly to the Carnot piece. I think you heard earlier in the remarks today that there is this composite vehicles effort and the lightweight manufacturing efforts that were mentioned by the MEDC representative. Both of those approaches will help with the efficiency of the vehicle, and so I think there is national funding and state expertise that's applicable to that, but it's not a problem that we're close to having solved.
Thank you.
In listening to all of this and putting it in a big framework, I think we've done a good job here of identifying something that's so critical to our success on any of these priorities, and that is that we seem to have an issue, a communication issue or a structural issue between how we've set up our education and how we've set up what businesses we're attracting. You know, the communication there is so key, and every one of our panelists have mentioned that in some form or fashion, that these two sectors need to connect. You know, everything from how the school is set up to the curriculum that we are engaging our young people in. Everything from, you know, we have these big attractions in Michigan, the state of Michigan, you know, the FRIB, the high-tech kinds of big projects. Mr. Smith mentioned 3 different R&D projects that have come in, and I didn't hear about those. I didn't know about those. So we need to talk about those successes. But the point is, you know, how do we get ahead of those and think about how we can further leverage those, as Dr. Hunt said, you know, the supply chain. How can we really do this right so that we can not only attract people and then send them off, but attract them and keep them invested in Michigan's future, and really and help really assist them in some way in helping to solve some problems that are found across the states and across the world. So I think that's something we might not totally answer today, right? But maybe Dr. Ballard's suggestion of extending the education year to 200 days would help.
Clear.
We'd have a few more days to work through some of these issues. I'm going to turn to the panelists and ask them to give a closing statement, and then we'll wrap it up, okay? I'm going to turn it around, back it up a little bit, and go with Dr. Hunt first off. Thank you.
That gives everyone else time to think, anyway. I appreciate the questions and people's attention. I hope that folks will feel free to call upon the university, especially those of you who are taking new positions of responsibility in the state. I know the other institutions in the state will feel the same way, but MSU is at your service, and if you can't get what you need from your extension agent, or you can't get what you need from someone you know there, please call the Research and Graduate Office, and we will try and find a person with real expertise who can help with whatever problem you're confronting.
Thank you.
Priorities for 2015, transportation infrastructure. Whether you agree or disagree on the ballot proposal, we've got to move forward and fix our roads and improve public transit. I expect we're going to have an ongoing debate at the state and federal level over health care, implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Insurance agents, insurance carriers are struggling with the individual employer mandates. It's created a real dilemma for a lot of small businesses and medium-sized companies. Later this year, the federal EPA will pull the plug on about half the power plants in the state. Renewable and alternative energy is very important. We need baseload generating capacity. I expect we'll have a big debate coming up later this year on energy policy. The governor's clearly going to continue to focus on making government more efficient and customer service. In education, we've got to encourage excellence and reward success, and we've got to try and lift up and challenge the schools, whether they're traditional or charter, who are falling short of their mission. So I think there are a lot of great opportunities to keep Michigan moving forward in the upcoming year.
Mr. Fowler?
I think we've all, the most common theme, I think, among the comments that have been made here are the skills of the workforce. We have, in Michigan, we have jobs that go begging because there's nobody there to do, who has the required skills. If you look at the most affluent states, what do they have that we don't have? They have more PhDs than we have, and they have more bachelor's degrees than we have as a fraction of their population, and they have more throughout the entire spectrum of the skill. Now, this is a comment that people have, I came to Michigan in 1983, and in 1983 and 84, I was at conferences where folks said that we had an undereducated workforce and an underskilled workforce, and we ought to do something about it. I think that's still a good idea, and I think we need to take that even more seriously than we have before.
And, not to repeat the others, so I would agree with what the others have said, and just, to make two statements. I mean, one, we've been world-class at competition at every level, between communities, between school districts, between families, between the east and west side of the state. We've got to get world-class at collaboration if we're going to make use of the resources we have here in Michigan. And then secondly, and I'm very optimistic, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the natural resources that we can get the job done. And if we fail, it's only going to be because we didn't do it right, not because we didn't have the resources or somebody else should have done it for us. So I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very excited about 2015 and beyond. But again, we've got to get world-class at collaboration at all levels if we're going to make use of this future.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you for being here today, and I appreciate your clapping for our panelists. Look forward to seeing you soon at our next forum. As they say, fair winds, right? Take care.